Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating political argument. We're unpacking a recent broadcast from a channel called The Liberal Hive Mind. Now, this channel pushes back hard against what it calls conservative doomer mentality, and they're actually predicting a massive midterm upset for the GOP in 2026 and 2027. We're not here to take sides at all. We're just going to objectively look at the exact data, the logic, and the rhetoric they use to build their case. Let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at that bold midterm prediction. Second, we're analyzing the polling data they use. Third, we'll examine a massive funding gap. And fourth, we'll see how they're framing political rhetoric.
Okay, part one, a bold midterm prediction and setting the stage. So, before even making their big prediction, the commentator addresses this really palpable feeling of weakness within their own conservative base. They describe it as a five-alarm fire sentiment. People looking at the landscape thinking the numbers are just so abysmal that they should abandon ship entirely. But the source aggressively pushes back against this doer mentality. They are absolutely refusing to wave the white flag, arguing that the situation is totally salvageable if the right strategies are put into play.
Moving right along to part two, analyzing the polling data, specifically looking at the Harvard-Harris X poll.
To counter all that pessimism, the commentator points straight to 2026 congressional ballot data from a recent Harvard-Harris X poll. And right now, that poll shows an exact 50-50 dead heat between Democrats and Republicans. The channel makes the case that this specific data set cuts right through what they view as skewed mainstream polling to reveal the actual reality on the ground.
Now, what's really intriguing here is the sharp distinction the broadcast draws between general registered voters and likely voters. The channel argues that polls showing a Democratic lead are fundamentally flawed because they're sampling adults who are, frankly, unengaged. They describe them as basically distracted by things like TikTok. On the flip side, you have your likely voters. The argument goes that midterms are decided solely by these highly politically activated individuals. And within that crucial, fired-up subset, the race is a flat-out tie.
The source also leans heavily into the momentum hidden inside this data. Among those likely voters, Democrats have dropped 2 points, while Republicans have gained 2 points. They argue that Democratic leads traditionally shrink as Election Day gets closer and closer. So, in their view, these numbers are likely to swing even further in the GOP's favor.
That brings us to part three, the massive funding gap in examining the resources.
Citing New York Times reporting on mid-April FEC filings, the source reveals a massive, undeniable discrepancy in cash on hand. Republican-aligned committees are sitting on roughly $844 million, and Democrat-aligned groups? They're at about $243 million. Now, the source does note that while the Democratic Party has recuperated a bit from multi-million-dollar post-election debts, they are still trailing by a truly massive margin.
So we're talking about a staggering $600 million edge. The commentator emphasizes that this isn't just some abstract number on a spreadsheet. It translates to unparalleled ad buying power. It essentially means the GOP can just flood the zone with campaign ads at a scale that their opposition literally won't be able to match.
But wait, it's not just about the cash. The broadcast points to major structural advantages that act as a defensive bulwark. They list off some very specific developments: the potential for a new Virginia map to be blocked by the Supreme Court, Florida poised to gain 4 seats, newly approved Texas maps favoring the GOP, and potential changes to the Voting Rights Act. To the source, these are basically insurmountable structural leads.
All right, on to our final section, part 4, framing political rhetoric from the commentator's perspective. The commentator fiercely argues that the GOP is entirely justified in its aggressive posture, explicitly stating that they are, quote, fighting fire with fire. Addressing critics who want to tone down the overall political temperature, the source claims that any extreme conservative rhetoric is strictly a necessary, defensive response to left-wing attacks. To justify this whole fighting fire with fire stance, the channel claims Democrats have essentially handed the GOP endless campaign ammunition over the last year and a half. They point to a laundry list of what they defined as radical actions: political indictments, government shutdowns being used as leverage, no King's commentary, and heavy rhetoric from high-profile figures like Gavin Newsom. And this right here perfectly illustrates the core narrative of the channel. It's a complete reversal of the mainstream media narrative. They vehemently reject the idea that conservatives are the ones instigating division. Instead, they frame the movement, and specifically Donald Trump, as the defensive victims. The argument is that conservatives just want lower taxes and secure borders while facing what the source calls a decade of despicable attacks. Bringing all these threads together, the source concludes that a massive midterm upset in 2026 and 2027 is a very real possibility. but it absolutely requires execution. If the GOP leverages its massive funding edge, capitalizes on those map advantages, and passes specific legislation, the commentator insists that the conservative doomsday scenario will be proven completely, entirely wrong.
So, we've just seen how a single broadcast weaves together selective polling, hard financial data, and highly charged framing to build a deeply compelling narrative for its audience. Which leaves us with a pretty essential question. As we navigate the modern media landscape, how does the deliberate packaging of statistics through a highly polarized lens ultimately shape our shared political reality? Keep questioning how the information around you is built. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.